course, thank everyone involved in this program for inviting me here, and thank all of you for coming. I was warned it's a very learned group, so I have to be at the top of my game today. But I think that there may be some people who also are not too familiar with the tradition that I come from. So I thought, let me explain a little bit first. I am a monk of the Ramakrishna order. Our headquarters are in West Bengal, in India. This is an order of monks that was started by Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda was the first Hindu monk to come to America. This was for a very large Parliament of Religions program, the first program of its kind that took place in Chicago in 1893. And Swami Vivekananda, we refer to as Swamiji. Swamiji spoke there and was a very popular speaker, was invited to travel around, and he started different centers at that time and created some interest in Vedanta in the West. This was the beginning really of Indian traditions of yoga and Vedanta coming to the Western country. He was a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. You can see the photograph here. Sri Ramakrishna is in the middle, and to the right is Sri Sharada Devi, whom we call the Holy Mother, and to the left Swami Vivekananda. Sri Ramakrishna was a very simple village priest in a village called Kamarpukur in West Bengal. And from his very childhood, he exhibited tremendous interest in spirituality. But at a certain stage of his life, because of the death of his father and poverty and everything, he had to come to Calcutta with his elder brother and to work as a priest. They ended up in the temple compound that had just been started by a very wealthy woman by the name of Rani Rashmani. And this is in a place called Dakshineshwar, just across from what is now our headquarters at Bellarmine. And Sri Ramakrishna ultimately was given the duty of being a priest of the Kali temple, the form of worship of God as the Divine Mother. And he was unusual in that he wasn't satisfied with doing any simple ritual or anything. He had this burning desire to know, who is this mother that I am worshiping? Is this just an idol? Am I just doing some, repeating some mantras and doing some worship and all of that? Or is there a real mother to the universe that is the mother of all of us? So he became obsessed with this idea to the point where he spent all of his time every night. He would go, there's a jungle area just north of the temple compound. He would spend the whole night in prayer and worship meditation and really calling on the Divine Mother with tears in his eyes, sometimes rolling on the ground. People thought he was mad. He's going through this period of divine madness. They would see him just even during the day rolling on the ground, calling Mother, 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 and people thought maybe he lost his own mother. They had no idea what was happening to him. So half of the people thought he was mad. But ultimately this led to a tremendous realization. He was in the Kali temple one day, and there's a sword that's kept hanging there, part of the ritual of the Kali temple. And he said, Mother, if you don't reveal yourself to me, I'll cut my throat with the sword. So at that point he reached for it. And he had this tremendous vision where he says that he felt as if wave after wave of consciousness seemed to roll over him. The temple and everything around him began to disappear from his view, and he lost all outer consciousness for how long he didn't know, some hours, and just immersed in this bliss of what he called this union with the Divine Mother. For him, the Divine Mother is God, both in a personal and impersonal form. Highest conception of God that he could imagine. So after that, he was completely transformed. Now he could barely do any real worship, But he was consumed with the second idea. Can God be realized through different paths? So one by one, he began to worship according to the different paths within Hinduism, different Vaishnava paths, worshipping God through the different bhavas, worshipping God as Hanuman worshipped Rama, Dasya Bhava, and as Radha worshipped Krishna, Madhura Bhava. Went through all of them. Each time he took up a different spiritual path, he ended up with the highest vision, and losing all outer consciousness and feeling himself merged with the object of his worship. One Vedanta monk came by the name of Totupuri, who said that what is all this devotional stuff and emotion and everything, that you're fit for this hard path of knowledge. Forget about this personal God, that God is your very own self, that infinite, absolute, impersonal Brahman. So Sri Ramakrishna said, let me check with my mother. He thought his mother, he would ask his mother. He went in the Kali temple. So he came back and said, her mother said yes. So he was given vows of sannyasa. He became a monk, a formal monk. Now, prior to this, when he was going through the state of madness, divine madness, his family thought that the way to bring his mind back down to the world was to get him married. This is what they do in India. If somebody gets too spiritual, they say get him married. Then he'll have to have a job and become like a normal person. So he was, marriage was arranged. In those days, of course, it was more of a betrothal child marriage. This little Sharada Devi was 5 years old. He was 23 years old. So they have a marriage, but it's more like an engagement. She'll go back until she grows up, and he'll go back. So by the time she was 18, she heard from her village everyone saying, your husband has gone mad. So she thought, if my husband's gone mad, if it's true, then still I'm his wife. I should be by his side. So she went to join him. And one of the first things he did was worship her as a form of the Divine Mother. Well, one of the concepts that we find in Vedanta is that God dwells within all beings. In some, there's a greater manifestation because the covering is more clear. So he looked upon his wife, Sharada Devi, the same way that he looked upon his own mother, the same way he looked upon the Divine Mother of the universe. So they never lived as husband and wife. She lived a life of a nun also. And after he passed away, she became the guiding force of our monastic movement. So we refer to her as the Holy Mother. Anyhow, the Swami Vivekananda was a highly educated, from a Western standpoint, young man. Calcutta, of course, was the capital of the British Raj in those days, and many of these young men were sent to English medium missionary schools. They had a great education in Western philosophy and science and all sorts of things. But he came to Sri Ramakrishna when he was just a teenager, 17, 18, something like that, and realized that sitting before this practically illiterate, poor Brahmin from a village, he was hearing wisdom that he had never heard before. And one of them, I should also say that after Sri Ramakrishna practiced all of these other disciplines, he met, one by one, these teachers would come. Somebody came who practiced the Sufi faith, so Islam. So he said, let me practice that also. This is, of course, highly irregular for a Brahmin priest living in a Brahmin temple, in a Hindu temple compound, to want to do this. So he removed all of the pictures from his room. He wanted a Muslim cook to cook for him. He did everything in a very literal fashion. They said, no, that's too much. You'll have to leave. So they got a Muslim cook to teach a Brahmin cook how to cook according to that stuff. Anyhow, he followed the Sufi tradition for some time and had a vision of Muhammad, and also had the realization that there's Allah that is worshipped by the Muslims, and Shiva or Durga, whoever, by the Hindus, there's one and the same. And he also had this curiosity about Christianity. And he had someone read to him from the Bible, and one day he was visiting the home, and there was a picture of the Madonna and child, and he was deeply meditating on that, and he felt light come from that and enter into him, and he went into another ecstatic mood. and had a conviction from that time onward that Christ was also a special manifestation of the divine. In Hinduism, there's something similar to the divine incarnation, but it happens over and over again all the time, that idea. So he concluded from this, a very nice little statement, Joto ma toto pat. As many faiths, so many paths. Each different faith is a path to God, and everyone can realize God through it. So Swami Vivekananda came to this country with that message of tolerance, that we should all help each other, we should love each other, we're all trying to realize the same ultimate truth, whether we say the personal God or whether we say nirvana, enlightenment, whatever it is. And that is the message that he brought with him. Now, so he started some centers here. He went back to India and started the monastic order, and that was in 1897. And slowly it grew, and now we have centers all over India, and we have a dozen or so centers in the United States with lots of branch centers also. In fact, there's some hope that some little group will start here also, inspired by the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. But we're not at all sectarian. That was the special feature, that he paid equal respect to all different traditions. So when you hear me referring to Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, it's not with a view to convert anybody. This is the tradition that I know, that I come from, that literally changed my life. So just my special reverence for this particular tradition. Now, the topic that I chose for this morning is a single verse, actually half a verse, half of the first verse of the Isha Upanishad. The Upanishads are considered to be the ultimate standard of truth in the Vedantic tradition. Vedanta has three different scriptures that we rely upon. One is Bhagavad Gita, the other is Brahma Sutra, but the most important is the Upanishads, because this is Shruti, this is considered revealed literature. And it's supposed to be the statements of these God-realized souls. So this is held in great reverence. This Isha Upanishad is one of the shortest of all of the Upanishads, but considered a very important Upanishad. Now, there's half a verse. It's interesting because there's another very important statement that also refers to half a verse. There's the famous verse, we don't know who composed it. Some people think Shankaracharya himself, but in one of these verses it doesn't seem to have a real author. It says, Shloka Paraksyami Yaduttam Vrandakokti. I will tell you in half a verse what is written in millions and millions of scriptures. Brahma Satyam, Jagat Vitya, Jivo Brahmaiva Napara. Very famous statement that Brahman alone is the ultimate reality. So there's no dualistic position according to this statement in Vedanta. Of course, there are other schools of Vedanta, but in Advaita Vedanta, it says that God is on one side and the universe is on the other side, and they're living beings, that they're all separate, that there's one totality, there's one whole. This is called the Brahman. Brahman is real. Now what about this world, Jagat? This world, as long as we see this world as something separate, is false. Now false, we don't mean it's just an illusion. By false, we mean that it's constantly changing, it's transitory. The whole world has a dreamlike quality to it that is floating before our eyes. We're the permanent reality, the witness of it, and it's floating before our eyes, so Jagat Vitya. And then Jiva means the individual soul. Who is this individual soul? This individual soul is one with the Supreme Soul. Jiva Brahma Eva, nothing separate, nothing other than that. Now, when we get to the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, he was unique because he didn't care for these different schools. The three different schools of Vedanta. One will say that the individual soul and the Supreme Soul are absolutely identical. That the only thing that makes us think the individual soul is different is because we're covered with the body, mind, and senses. We're enclosing it somehow. The same way a jar will enclose the space inside without really affecting space. There's only one space. Then we have another school that will say, this Shishta Dvaitavada, that will say that there are individual souls, but they all dwell within Brahman. Then there's a third school, the dualists, that say individual souls, they've come out of a Brahman like sparks coming out of a fire. And we can find statements in the Upanishads for all of these. The Upanishads are not strictly philosophy. It's a type of poetry which allows for different types of interpretations. And Sri Ramakrishna liked all of these and said it's not a question one is true and one is false, one is better. It's a question of what is suitable to us. So some people are more suited to the devotional path, which will require some sense of separation between the individual and God. Some don't care for any of this devotional stuff. They don't think this personal concept of God doesn't appeal to them. They'll be for this path of knowledge. That way. Okay, so this half a verse, that Brahman alone is real, that this universe is, Sri Ramakrishna used to use the term anitya, transitory. We don't have to say it's false or imaginary or anything, but it's fleeting. For something to be real in Vedanta means it has to be unchanging and eternal. So it's fleeting. And then this idea that the individual soul, we don't know who we are. This is the whole thing. We really don't know who we are because we identify so much with everything external. All of the different coverings that we have. Not just this physical body, we identify with our place of origin, with our religion, with our race, with our ethnicity, the clothes that we wear, all sorts of things. Who are we when we strip away everything? That's the real self, and that's this witnessing consciousness, which is one with the Brahman. Okay, now the half a verse that we're going to talk about this morning has to do with how do we realize it. It's a very practical, a very brilliant and practical type of verse. From this Isha Upanishad, let me read it first. Isha vasyam idam sarvam yadkincha jagatyam jagat. Then the second half, kena tyaktena bhunjita magurita kashyasvidhanam. It's also very nice, but we're not going to do that. We're going to stick with this first half. And whatever exists in this world, so that means the individual beings, it means this physical universe, it means everything. Whatever exists in this world, Isha Vasyam. Isha means by the Lord. And this Avasyam means is to be covered. Now, there are different interpretations of this verse. There's some that will say that everything is covered by God. Now, this makes better sense, but I don't think it's right. This makes much better sense because we want to tell everybody, yes, God is dwelling within everything, God pervades everything, everything is already covered with God. But the point of this verse, and this is not just my understanding, Shankaracharya takes it this way, and Swami Vivekananda takes it this way, that this verse is not saying that God doesn't exist in this world, we have to add God to the world. It's saying that God is already there, but we don't know it, so we have to cover everything with God in order to realize it. It's a very odd type of psychology, but it turns out to be a very brilliant type of psychology. So whatever exists in this changing universe is to be covered by the Lord, whatever that means. So we have to try to understand it. Then the second half, enjoy the world by virtue of what has been renounced. Do not covet anyone's wealth. Something like that. So it's a paradox. We're being told that somehow this God dwells within everything, God is covering everything, and yet we don't see it, so we're supposed to cover it again with God. As if somebody tells us that somebody has come and that person is your friend. We know the person, we know what that person looks like. That person's wearing a mask, and they say, you want to see what that person looks like? Get a mask that looks like that person and put it on top of his face. It doesn't seem to make much sense. And what is covering everything? Now, if we say that everything is to be covered by God, what is everything covered with now? Now we bring in this concept of Maya. What do we mean by Maya? Can somebody give me a definition of Maya? This will be interactive a little bit. Huh?
Illusion.
Illusion. Okay, what type of illusion?
Magical display.
Actually, the earliest definition we can say of Maya is something like magic, that we find very early in Rig Veda and everything. It comes to take a very technical type of meaning. It's that by virtue of which the unchanging, permanent reality appears to change. And it's something which, let me set up the problem, first of all. Those who believe in this Advaita Vedanta school, the conception of Brahman is the ultimate reality. Brahman, we could say, somehow is the Godhead, not personal God. In the Western language, they'll use the term Godhead. Just the ultimate reality as consciousness. Now, when we read the definition of Brahman, everything is negative, but Brahman isn't. We can't say anything positive about it. It's beyond the senses, it can't be seen, heard, understood, but also actionless. Brahman can't do anything. Now, how do we explain this universe? Now, we say the universe is unreal. How do we explain the unreal universe? There's one thing to say that this universe is unreal, it's another thing to say that it doesn't exist, and it never existed. If we have a dream, we can say, it was just a dream, it wasn't real. But we can legitimately ask, well, how did the dream come about? It's not the same as somebody who sleeps the whole night and doesn't have a dream at all. Right? There's a dream, but it's a dream. The dream world is not a real world. So how do they explain all of this? They can't explain it. So we bring in this concept of Maya, that Maya is something inscrutable. That means there's no logical definition for it, but it's that by virtue of which this Brahman becomes somehow the source of this created universe. If we're sleeping at night, we're a sleeper at that time. We're not a dreamer, we're a sleeper. How does the sleeper become a dreamer? Can the sleeper decide, now let me have a dream? Sleeper's sleeping. There's no I there. There's nobody to think or decide or to do anything. So we don't really have a concept that God creates the world because God wants to create the world. Although we have that allegorical type of language in the Upanishads. It's true. The God thinks may be many, looks around and everything, but it's allegory. We won't get that type of interpretation by Shankaracharya or anything. We bring in this idea of Maya. So something has to be there to create or to transform the sleeper into a dreamer. So the dreamer will be what in Sanskrit is called the Ishvara, the personal God, not even personal God, creator God. Creator God. And what is projected out of that will be this universe. And this concept of Brahman is that Brahman doesn't create the universe and then disappear. It has to uphold it. The sleeper and the dreamer both have to be there the whole time. And where does the dream go? It goes right back. So this in the Upanishads we also get this illustration of the Varnanavi, the spider. That the spider spins. You've seen the spider. It'll come down on the web. It'll create it. Actually, it spins it out of its mouth. They say Varnanavi, that it comes out of the navel. But anyhow, it out of the mouth, and then it can go back up and take it in. So this universe comes out of Brahman, but Brahman can't do anything. So we have to come up with this idea of Maya. Now, the other nice thing with this illustration is that the spider, it creates a web and it lives in the web. So Brahman dwells within this universe. Who is the actor in the dream? It's nothing but the dreamer who is also the sleeper. So we have this all this one and the same. So we have this concept of Maya, which somehow can't be a separate thing from Brahman, and yet it can't compromise the pure nature of Brahman. So they say it's like the venom inside of a snake. The snake is not affected by the venom. It can poison somebody else, kill somebody else, but the snake is free from it. And then they'll also say that, well, if this Maya can disappear, then we don't have to explain where it comes from. When we have knowledge, then it's gone. So actually, there's no easy explanation for the creation of this universe. Either we say it always existed, or it comes from the divine, or God wanted to do it. There's no simple idea. But this Maya has a second meaning, and that is after this creation takes place, however it happens, each and every individual also is under the veil of some type of Maya, which we call here avidya, ignorance. Now, this ignorance, it starts from our very birth, before the mind is developed to the point where we have any self-awareness. The mind is going outward. The Upanishad gives a nice verse, the Swayambhu, that we were created in such a way that the mind goes out to the senses, we identify with the external thing. A small child cannot distinguish his own body from his mother's body. And can't even decipher anything, just sees shapes, colors and shapes and forms. Doesn't see objects or anything. We will get to this maybe. This is also part of the projection that we do. We project all of our past experience so that we can recognize things. We don't see colors and shapes and forms. We see people and things and furniture and all sorts of things like that. But this Maya, or ignorance, avidya, affects the individual in the sense that we become identified with all of the external parts of our being. And the Taittiriya Upanishad, this is explained in terms of something called the Panchakosha doctrine. Panchakosha means 5 sheaths. Now, Sri Ramakrishna gives the example of an onion. The onion, it'll have this dark brown outer sheath, which is like this physical body. Then, inside of that, it gets lighter in color, a little more transparent. We'll have the senses and our vital organs and all of that. Inside of that, the mind. Inside of that, the intellect. Inside of that, the subconscious. And inside of that, if we try to picture, inside of that will be the real self. But if we peel away all of the layers of the onion, that inside portion, this is an empty space. Then it's one with all space. So we end up trying to find the self as if it's hidden inside of all of this, and it turns out that from the very beginning it's been unlimited, unaffected, not in a state of bondage or anything. The bondage comes from ourselves, that we don't realize our true nature, that we become identified with all of this, that we see other people as different from us, and the result of this is fear and jealousy and desire and anger and all sorts of things. And this is what keeps us in a state of bondage. Now, what this verse is saying is that what do? We can try to peel away everything. We can try to peel away, but suppose we want to find out what's the ground upholding this floor. We peel away, we scrape off this level, there's another level. We keep scraping off. Each time we have a new surface there. We can peel the algae off the surface of a lake, but we can't peel the surface off the lake. Suppose we have clear water and we want to peel that off. We can't do it. So this is a different type of method. This is saying that we will take a different tack. We'll try to superimpose this idea of divinity. Otherwise, if we take this physical universe and we take our out trying to reach this Brahman, but where we end up getting rid of everything, unless we're very, very, very subtle, and this path of knowledge requires a tremendous amount of detachment and everything. But he says, to the question of how to cure the evils of life, the answer apparently is to give up life. It reminds one of the old story. a mosquito settled on the head of a man, and the friend, wishing to kill the mosquito, gave it such a blow that he killed both the man and the mosquito. Yeah. We have this other illustration. You've heard the expression, throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Yeah. Do you know what it comes from? In the old days, old pioneer days, they would have one great big tub, and they would fill it with hot water, and the adults would use it first. By the time they would get out, it would be a little dirty, then the kids, but by the time that the little baby got in, it was so dirty you could hardly see that there's anybody in it. Every chance you would throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have a classic illustration in Vedanta of the snake and the rope. I'm sure many of you know about this. That suppose we're walking down the road, it's a little bit dark out, and we see something lying on the side of the road, and it's curled in shape like a snake, and we assume that it's a snake. And the first reaction is fear. Then somebody says, go up and take a closer look, it doesn't seem to be moving. We go up and look and we say, it's only a rope. Okay, so this is a classic example that we're seeing nothing but Brahman. God himself has become Otis, but we mistake it because of ignorance. No other reason we mistake it for that. Now, what this verse is saying is that if, in our attempt to get rid of the snake, we cut it in half, then we've also cut the rope. So this is just, now it's not saying that there's other path, and 1880 is not a legitimate path and everything, but it's saying that it's a different way of looking at this whole thing. So what we're doing is we're trying to cover this reality with the truth. We're trying to make it appear to be what it already is. Psychologically, it's a very subtle, counterintuitive way of doing it, but it's a very important way of doing it. Shankaracharya in his commentary gives the example of sandalwood. If you have, let's say, beads made of sandalwood, that the more you rub them, the more the fragrance comes out. And also, if you dip it in water, it loses its fragrance. Now, if we dip it in water and it loses its fragrance, we don't take fresh sandal paste or essence of sandalwood and add it to it. We simply take that same sandalwood and we rub it again. So we're adding on to it the fragrance that comes from it, that's already there. It's a very nice type of example. In fact, this term, alasya, is to be covered. This also means to be given fragrance. So we're taking this universe, we're giving the fragrance of the divine. The universe means physical universe and all other living beings. We're trying to add the sense of divinity to it with the understanding that it's already there. Only we don't see it. The problem is not that God needs to be added to the world. The problem is that we need to have that direct vision and realization of it. So covering everything with God means that it's just affecting our mental attitude. It means we infuse everything with the thought of the divine. When we see people in front of us, we try to realize God dwelling within them. When we see this universe, we try to feel that it's a manifestation of divinity or the divine power. Now, I was mentioning this Maya as an explanation for how this universe comes into being. There's another explanation that's followed by one tradition in India called the Shakta tradition. Sri Ramakrishna liked these ideas very much, that if this power will create this universe, whether it's real or unreal, whether it's what we want to say, mithya, illusory, or whatever, still, the power, if it belongs to God, then it's something sacred. And if the power, that Shakti is sacred, if it belongs to God, then the universe is sacred. So it's a different attitude. That why not look at this as, he says, as this Aishwarya, as the glory of the divine manifestation. And really, when we read the Gita and other texts, we see Arjuna is asking in this Vibhuti Yoga chapter, he's asking, and how can we see you dwelling within the world? He said, whenever you see this huge mountain, you're seeing me. Whenever you see this Ashwata Gach, we'll get to that later, among all trees, you're seeing me. So we have this concept of Virat. The universe is a manifestation of the divine. So part of this is just constant reminding ourselves. We know philosophically the truth of all of these things. How to make it tangible for us. This is again from Swami Vivekananda's lecture called God in Everything. Swamiji gave several lectures when he was in the West. He was speaking to an audience that didn't know anything about the different scriptures. If he had said this is from the Upanishad, Isha Upanishad, it wouldn't have meant anything. So it's interesting. There's some lectures that follow some of the Upanishads almost verse by verse without mentioning the Upanishad. So this God in Everything is this Isha Upanishad. He has one in the Mundaka Upanishad, one in the Katha Upanishad also. But this really sums up the whole thing. He says we have to cover everything with the Lord Himself, not by a false sort of optimism, not by blinding our eyes to the evil, but by really seeing God in everything. Thus, we have to give up the world. Now, what does it mean to give up the world? And when the world is given up, what remains? God. What is meant? You can have your wife, you can have your husband. It does not mean that you are to abandon them, but that you are to see God in the wife, God in the husband, God in the children. What does that mean? To turn them out of doors as some human brutes do in every country? Certainly not. That is diabolism. It is not religion. But see God in your children. So in everything, in life and in death, in happiness and in misery, the Lord is equally present. This is a special feature of those who worship God as Divine Mother, especially Kali worship. Kali worship is very popular in Bengal, you know that. And Swamiji liked this idea that see God in the terrible as well as in what's beautiful. Is it not the hand of God that we see when there's a tsunami or when the volcano or a destructive hurricane? Also the hand of God. There is no God and devil. There is this one divine power. Sometimes it manifests in a very positive way, sometimes in ways that, of course, according to our understanding, are very negative ways. So he says, in happiness and in misery, the Lord is equally present. The whole world is full of the Lord. So, this Ishavasyan, we're covering the world with God, which is already filled with God. Open your eyes and see Him. This is what Vedanta teaches. Give up the world which you have conjectured, because your conjecture was based upon a very partial experience, upon very poor reasoning, and upon your own weakness. Give it up. The world we have been thinking of for so long, the world to which we have been clinging so long, is a false world of our own creation. Now, let me finish this, then I'll get back to this. Give that up. Open your eyes and see that as such it never existed. It was a dream, Maya. What existed was the Lord Himself. It is He who is in the child, in the wife, and in the husband. It is He who is in the good and in the bad. He is in the sinner, in the sin and in the sinner. He is in life and in death. Now I forget what I was going to say. I'll come back to it. Okay, now, this idea of covering everything, we can take it with this external universe, but I think it makes more sense with ourselves. Sri Ramakrishna used to use a particular expression. He would say, Arop korte hobe. Arop, this is a particular concept of superimposition. Adhyasa, adhyaropa, there are different terms for it. In traditional Vedanta, this superimposition is the source of all of our problems. What it means is that we've taken qualities that belong to one thing and we've falsely assumed that they belong to something else. There's a very easy and simple example. If we take a crystal, or we take a vase, a clear vase, and we put a red rose behind it, and somebody walks into the room, and you ask them what color is that vase, they'll say it's red. Now what have they done? They've taken the redness that belongs to the rose, and they've superimposed it, or falsely thought that it belongs to the... Now it belongs to it. If it really belonged to it, and really entered into it, if you remove the rose, it'll remain red. Right? But it doesn't. So we take the qualities of one thing and we superimpose it on another. Shankaracharya gives another example that when we see at nighttime, full moon night, and you'll see a cloud, and sometimes it'll look as if the moon is floating across the cloud. Really, the moon is stationary, at least from relative point of view, and it's the cloud that's moving. So we're attributing motion to that which is still, and stillness to that which is moving. This is a double adhyasa. Now, this means that with the individual, this pure consciousness, the real self, we're attributing all sorts of things as a personality and physical features and all of that. So, what is a very negative thing, the source of all of our problems in Advaita Vedanta, will be used in a positive way with this kind of spiritual practice. Another second very interesting way in which we can say a devotional path or a more dualistic path differs from this Vedantic path with the understanding of two terms, nama, rupa, name and form. In Vedanta, name and form is the culprit. Why do we think of things as being particular and separate and everything? Because they have a different name and a different form. If we have all sorts of gold jewelry, and some is in the shape of a bracelet, some in the shape of an anklet, some of an earring, and so the shape is different, the name is different. We think of all different types of jewelry, but it's all gold. The essence of it is gold, the importance of it is gold. In India, how do you measure the value of gold ornaments? You just weigh it. Nobody bothers if it's very beautifully done or anything. You can melt it down and have new things made and everything. It's just the weight of it. It's just the gold. It's not the shape or the form. So the nama rupa, these are very much separate, and they make us think of them as separate things. We don't see the gold underlying it. So this is that name and form. Now, in the devotional path, name and form are the two most important ways that we fix the mind on God. Repetition of the name and focusing on a form. So the same thing with this adhyasa or aropana. That if the problem is we've superimposed this false idea of the body, mind, and senses over the self, then let's superimpose a different type of idea. And this second type of idea is what is known in the devotional traditions as bhavas. And in the Vaishnava tradition, there are 5 of them. There's this called the Panchabhava doctrine, where we adopt, aropana, that means that we adopt an attitude. We try to think of ourselves in a particular way, which allows us to have a relationship with God. So there's 2 different types of superimposition. If we have this understanding that the ultimate reality, Brahman, is impersonal absolute reality, then what do? We're giving it a name and we're putting a face on it. We're allowing us to feel some devotion towards it. And what do we do with ourselves? We also look upon ourselves in such a way that we can have a relationship with God. Now, this is done in devotional literature. This is done in a very literal, tangible way, with different spiritual attitudes that are based on examples that we find mostly in the Puranic tradition and the Itihasic tradition, mostly from the life of Krishna and Rama. So there are 5 of these different spiritual attitudes, and the first one is called the Shanta Bhava. It's not emphasized very much. This would be more for the non-dualists. But we also have this, what's called the Dasya Bhava. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, I mentioned, practice these things. Dasya Bhava involves looking upon God in a certain way, but more importantly, looking upon us, ourselves. This is the curious thing about it. If one wants to worship Rama as the master, then one finds who is the paradigm, who is the most important example, illustration of this attitude of a servant that we can think of. Hanuman. Okay? Hanuman, the monkey. Who is we look upon this monkey, the Mahavir, not an ordinary monkey, of course, as the epitome of this devotional attitude, looking upon God as the master. Now, we don't have to really care too much about Rama or Hanuman. The most important thing is this attitude that I want to devote my life to God. I want to be a servant of God. This is the most important thing, but we're making it very particular, because the more we particularize it, the more we can implement it. Now, for Sri Ramakrishna, he did this in a very, very literal way. That meant that he dressed like a monkey. He would tie his cloth so that the back of it, instead of he usually throws it over his shoulder, the back would hang down like a tail. He would jump from place to place. He would climb trees. He would eat bananas. All of this so that his mind would be completely merged, completely identified with the Hanuman. This is superimposition. He's superimposing this attitude of Hanuman, the ideal servant of God, on his own mind in order to realize this relationship and realize the ultimate master, Rama, who really is just a name and a form we've added to that supreme Brahman, to that ultimate reality. So he used to recommend this, Dasya Bhava. We can look upon God as a friend. So Sri Krishna, when he was a cowherd boy, he had his other friends, Sudama and others, but the interesting thing is that the mind is fixed more on the ideal worshipper than the object of worship. That has to happen first. We have to really, the whole mind has to be given to this idea of Hanuman. Or if we really like this Madhur Bhava, the highly devotional mood of Radha worshipping Krishna, then whole mind has to be fixed. What does it feel like? If I want to know what is it like to worship Krishna, I have to know what is it like to be to be Radha. That's the only way that I can have some inkling. So whole mind, we have to meditate, we have to superimpose this idea of Radha on us, so that we can really feel that that longing she had for Krishna is the longing we have. Now, it had nothing to do with Radha and Krishna. We have to understand that. It has to do with the longing of the soul for union with the Supreme Soul. There was a group of devotees that belonged to an organization called the Brahmo Samaj. The Brahmo Samaj, at that time in Calcutta, was a kind of reform movement, highly influenced by the West, by Christianity, highly critical of very standard Hindu practices. They didn't care for worship of the Guru, they didn't care for this idea of divine incarnation. They actually refused to do anything which they called idol worship. They had to sign something. They couldn't go into a temple and bow down before an image or anything like that. They'd get kicked out. So, but they loved Sri Ramakrishna somehow, and they came under his influence. So he used to say to them, you don't have to accept this Radha Krishna business. You don't have to believe that even there was a Radha, that there was a Krishna, anything like that. But try to understand this sense of attraction, this sense of longing that Radha had for Krishna. Radha went through two different moods. When she was separated from him, it was called viraha bhava. This sense of separation meant that every second she was thinking, when will I be with Krishna? When will I see my Krishna? And when she was with him, every second was, this joy of union. So by superimposing this attitude and mood and even feeling ourselves to be like Radha, we do it only so that we can enkindle within us this tremendous longing for union with God. It's meant only for that. We don't have to take it literally. The problem with religion is when we take things too literally and say, oh, you want to realize God, then you have to worship God as Krishna. It doesn't mean that. It can be in any tradition, but this is one way, a trick we can almost say, to help us increase this tremendous sense of longing that we have for union with the divine, or for realization of our oneness with the divine. Sri Ramakrishna was highly dualistic in most of his spiritual practices and highly non-dualistic in his realization. And Swami Vivekananda has a very beautiful statement. He says that we're all dualists in this path of devotion in the beginning. We all start out that way. We have to have the two. We have to have the servant and the master. But he says, love draws us towards the beloved. And as we get closer and closer and closer, then all sense of distinction disappears. We reach that state of union, that state of oneness. And when this ego completely dies, then there's no difference between lover and beloved. There's only oneness in that state. So, this is this idea of aropa, that we assume a particular attitude, covering everything with God. We're covering our own personality with that. Now, what does it do? It has a positive effect and a negative effect. From the negative side, it eliminates this sense of identification with our physical body. The mood and attitude that Sri Ramakrishna liked the most was looking upon God as mother. This is not one of the Vaishnava attitudes. There could be many of them. We can look upon God as father also. He liked to worship God as mother. That meant that he felt himself to be a small child. This was his attitude, that he liked to think of himself as a small child. And through that attitude, this intimacy comes. See, each of the different moods has a special feature to it. Intimacy comes, perfect reliance on the Divine Mother comes, because the small child can't do anything. This is the perfect path for those who like to practice what's called sharanagati, this taking refuge with God, surrender to God. He gave a beautiful example of the kitten. He would give the example too, if you look at a small kitten and you look at a baby monkey. If you ever gone to the zoo and see the mother monkey, the baby monkeys will cling to it. They'll grab it underneath, the monkey will jump around and they'll hold on to it. He says the kitten can't even do that. All the kitten can do is call for the mother. The kitten will just go mew, 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 and the mother will come, and the mother itself will pick it up by the scruff of the neck. Now, where will the mother put it? He says sometimes she'll put it on the soft bed, the master's bed. The kitten is very happy. Sometimes she'll put it in the ashes in the fireplace. What does the kitten think? Equally happy, my mother put me here. Equally happy. My mother's put me here, it must be the best thing for me. Now, can you imagine if we can superimpose this attitude on ourselves, we'll have perfect contentment. No, this is a very serious thing. It's not a question that we become God-realized souls. It may lead to that. We hope that it'll lead to this feeling of oneness. But even before that, we feel that whatever happens, happens for our benefit. The mother is providing for us. She's doing everything for us. Whether it's true or not, the effect is the same. Yeah. Sri Ramakrishna used to repeat this expression, Jaman bhav ten milab. Jaman bhav ten milab. as is our attitude, so is our gain. We have to look, what do we gain from that? Now, it doesn't mean we want to be fools and just believe nonsense and everything, but it becomes true. If we believe that whatever happens is for the best, then we'll make it happen. It'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So this is superimposing this attitude of being a child. It has that special feature to it. The special feature of this servant attitude is self-effort. I can do anything. No one can stop me. Swami Atmajnananda has a Sanskrit poem where he says that we can crush the stars to atoms. We can unhinge the universe. Don't you know who we are? We are the servants of Sri Ramakrishna. Great pride. Great pride. But it's not the normal pride that we have. So what I was saying, I started to say that with this mother-child attitude, that from the negative side, we're eliminating this identification with this physical body. This physical body has a mother, a biological mother, whom of course we love and have the highest love and devotion and respect for and everything, but we want to cease to identify with this physical body. If we identify with the mother of the universe as our real mother, that means I'm thinking of myself in terms of spirit. No longer thinking of myself in terms of this body-mind complex thing. So that's the, if we want to say the negative side, it's a positive thing, but it's eliminating something, and what we're adding to it is this devotional attitude, which ultimately will lead to this oneness, because the child feels one with the mother. There's another very special feature that we have. We go for another 25 minutes or so. Now, there are different ways to practice this covering business with ourselves. This also works from a non-dualistic point of view. It's not just a devotional practice, of course. We have one of the Mahavakyas, the great statements from the Upanishads, is Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Now, when I say that, I am Brahman, what do I mean by I? My normal sense of I is I am so-and-so, I have a certain name, I was born in a certain place, I have certain personality traits, I'm a certain age. This is that sense of I that I have. In order for that statement to be true, we have two things we can do. One, we peel off all of these things so that we get to that real I. This is what I was saying, this peeling off process, this neti process, and sometimes we find out that there's no end to the peeling, and then we've gotten rid of the good stuff also. The other thing is we superimpose this idea of divinity on ourselves, covering everything with God. This is a very famous statement we read in a very nice text called the Ashtavakra Samhita. This is a text, for some reason, Sri Ramakrishna liked this. It's a highly philosophical, highly Advaita Vedantic text that Sri Ramakrishna liked very much. And Swami Vivekananda, when he came as a young man, he wanted to teach him this non-dualistic Advaita Vedanta. So he had Swamiji read from this text to him. At that time, he was just a young boy, Narendra. At that time, he belonged to the Brahmo Samaj. He liked this idea God is infinite, absolute, but this idea that God has become everything. He would say, you mean God is a table and God is a chair? What nonsense is that? And there's a long story how Thakur said, oh, okay, and he touched him in a very simple way, and then Swamiji saw everything as divine, everything is the embodiment of pure consciousness, and for several days he didn't know what was real, what was unreal. He would bang his head on the railing, did all sorts of things like that. Anyhow, one of the great statements from this text is that we're already free. It is as we think, so we become. So this other idea is we superimpose this idea on ourselves that we're perfect, that we're free already, that we're absolute, that we're one with His highest reality. This is what we generally think of in terms of affirmations. And Swami Vivekananda liked this idea very much. He If you go through his writings, you see so many times he'll say, think of yourself, tell yourself over and over again this. So there's one very nice quote here. People are taught from childhood that they are weak and sinners. Teach them that they are all glorious children of immortality, even those who are weakest in manifestation. Now, when we say to somebody, you're pure and you're perfect, they say, I'm not pure. My mind is full of all sorts of nasty ideas and things and everything. We say, but you're not that mind. You have to think of yourself as a higher self. You're the witness of that mind. So we understand that when we say we're pure, we're perfect and all that, it doesn't refer to the body, mind, and everything. We want to purify the mind as far as possible to be able to understand these things. But the real purity lies in this consciousness itself, which is functioning as the witness. So, let positive, strong, helpful thoughts enter into their brains. This is he's telling for children from very childhood. Lay yourselves open to these thoughts and not to weakening and paralyzing ones. Say to your own minds, I am he, I am he. Now in the beginning we may not believe it, and it may not make sense to us. But he says, repeat it over and over again. Let it ring day and night in your minds like a song. And at the point of death declare, I am he. That is the truth. We're telling ourselves something that we don't realize to be true, but it's true. The infinite strength of the world is yours. Drive out the superstition that has covered your minds. We've already covered something. We're covering it again. Let us be brave. Know the truth and practice the truth. The goal may be distant, but awake, arise, and stop not till the goal is reached. There's a story, I don't remember where it's from, that takes place in this forest. It's called the Forest of Forgetfulness. Vismarana or something. Anybody remember the story? Anyhow, there was a king who went hunting one day. And the horse stumbled and he fell off and he fell down and he got amnesia. And he found himself in this forest and he saw, dressed as a hunter with a bow and arrow, he thought, I must be a hunter. So he stayed there, he built a little hut for himself and he hunted and I don't know if he was content or not, but that was his life for some time. Then one day one of his ministers came and saw that, what is the king? We didn't know what happened to the king. He's been gone for a couple of years, and I see he's here, and he's dressed like a hunter and doing all of this. And so this man was very intelligent. And he said he must have had amnesia. If I just go and say, what are you doing? You're the king. Comes back, he'll think I'm crazy. Maybe he'll shoot me with that arrow even. So he went to him and said, oh, who are you? He said, I'm a hunter. I live here and everything. And he said, oh, I see. You're a hunter that way. You look a little bit like the king. You used to be there. He said, really? I look like the king. Yeah. Yeah, maybe you could even be a king. He's really, I could be a king. Yeah. And he said, well, why not just start thinking about it? Start thinking. Then why not tell yourself, I am a king, I am a king, I am a king. And he did it over and over again. One day, he said, oh, I am a king. And his memory came back that way. He had forgotten. So we're superimposing this something which is already true. One of the other disciples of Swami Krishna, his name was Swami Atmajnanananda, he used to say, today's imagination is tomorrow's realization. And that's exactly what this verse is about. Because we're covering it with God in the sense that it's just imagination. Now, imagination doesn't mean something false. It means that we're projecting something which we don't yet understand is true. But it turns out that it is true. And this is the beauty of affirmation. And affirmation isn't something that we repeat so that we get brainwashed into believing it. It's something that we repeat so that we realize that, oh, it's true. That now and it changes us, it affects us, it has to change our behavior and everything. I have a lot more stuff, but I've gone through really basic things. I'll be very happy if there are questions. Yeah, at this point we have another 15 plus minutes. So, yes?
I know you didn't want to talk about the second line.
Oh, okay, but I can.
But I'm just trying to see the connection. If the idea is to cover the universe with God, then what does it mean to renounce it?
I spoke about the first line because the second line does seem to have a little logical disconnect from the first line. What it means to me is that if we eliminate the falseness of things, then we can really enjoy it. How do we enjoy company with other people? We eliminate the sense of difference. If we cover everything with this idea of oneness, then we can enjoy it. If we get rid of this idea of ourselves as individuals who can only be content with enjoying things, we cover it with this idea that we have this oneness, we share things, and we can enjoy the world in a different way, without attachment, without clinging, without obsessions, things like that. Now the fourth part of this, kasyasvidhanam, ma guridha kasyasvidhanam. This is taken in two ways. One, ma guridha, don't be greedy for anything. Then the final portion, it either means don't covet anybody else's wealth, but the interpretation I prefer is don't be greedy for anything, because whose is wealth? What is actually belong to us? Nothing belongs to us. We utilize things for a very short period of time. What are the things we think belong to us? Our house. Maybe other people have lived before us, others, half the time the bank owns it. Or we simply have a piece of paper with a signature on it. Yeah. All these things what does it mean to own something? If we own something, we have to have a very strong sense of identification with the body. If we don't have that, then we're not owners of anything. So why covet anything? Everything belongs to God. Swami Krishna says that God laughs on two occasions. One, when he sees two brothers dividing their property. In India it's very common that these joint families, after a while, they get tired of it. They say, okay, you take half, I'll take half. He said, God laughs, don't they know it's all mine? You're just saying this half is mine, this half is yours, that way. If we eliminate those things, we can enjoy things better. Then we've eliminated competition with other people, we've eliminated this whole concept that contentment will come from external things, outside things. That, and we realize that we don't own anything. There's a nice story about a man on a train. One man is there on a long journey. It's a local train. So he sees that somebody gets in one seat. The conductor says to him, is this your seat? He says, yes, it's my seat. Let me see your ticket. And then he gets off. Another man comes, is this your seat? It's mine. He said, how many people own that seat? They said, but actually it only belongs to the train company. Nobody owns that seat. There was a question in back also?
Yes.
Yeah.
What is the Sanskrit term for the brief separation of
Viraha. V-I-R-A-H-A, this viraha bhava.
But it's called that separation that intensifies longing is the intensified longing for the God relationship between the couple. What is that one called?
Madhur bhava, M-A-D-H-U-R or madhura. Yeah, M-A-D-H-U-R-A and then V-H, long A, V-A. Madhur bhava. Yeah. Now, when we look at the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, and if we want to say what is the one common theme, what is the one thing that he says is the critical element in God realization or self-realization, it'll be one thing. He uses this term vyakulata. Vyakulata means this intense longing, intense anguish of heart at not having realized God, or intense longing for truth. The Buddha had the same thing with regard to truth, not personal God, but for some people it would be more personal God. He said this is the reason why we do everything. All of our spiritual practice is meant to increase this longing. and that ultimately it has to lead to this complete surrender to God. He takes this as the final thing. When we can do that, we do all of our self-effort. We as much as we possibly can, then we let go. But it's this burning desire, this vyakulata, and this comes from this feeling of separation that is the catalyst for all of this. He gives a very nice illustration. There's a bird that has been flying for a long time, and it gets very tired, and it's right on the coast, and it sees the ship that is in the harbor, and it lands on the mast of the ship and falls asleep. In the meantime, the boat goes out to sea, and when the bird wakes up, doesn't know what direction he's facing, can't see land in any direction, so it says, well, I want to get back to land. So flies as far as it can in one direction, until his wings are so tired, he says, I've got to go back, otherwise I'll perish. So it goes back and rests, goes in the other direction. Then does it in all the different directions, and doesn't see land in any direction. And then with great contentment says, then nothing to do. Wherever the ship takes me, I'll go. Perfect contentment. Now, we can't practice that until we've flapped our wings a little bit. We have to try as hard as we can. We have to do all of our spiritual practice and our meditation and prayer and whatever disciplines that we do in order to reach the stage where we can, because it's a very high stage, this is the stage of Sharanagati, of surrender. So we have to do all of that. And we're not just doing our spiritual practices to tire ourselves out. This transformation takes place along the way, purification of the heart and focusing of the mind. So many things happen during that time.
Swamiji,
Yes.
the second line, I know we are not going to discuss that.
No, it's okay.
First text, Vayana,
Mm.
that means to remove the superimposition, Mama and Rupa.
Mm.
Next word he's saying, Bunjita,
Mm.
means Shankar Bhagavad they give the commentary on the Palaya.
Mm.
Please comment on this.
Yeah, what do we mean by this? We can take this. What do we enjoy? We can enjoy the supreme ultimate reality. We can take it that way. We can also take it that we can enjoy the world because there's no attachment to it, there's no sting to it, all of that. But if by covering everything with God and renouncing everything false, everything changeable, then we come in contact with an ultimate reality, that'll be the highest type of enjoyment. So we can take it in that sense also. Yes?
You said there were 5 spiritual attitudes. One was Dasya Bhav like Hanuman, one was Mitra Bhav like Arjun, and then Madhur Bhav like Radha. What are the other two?
Shanta, Bhava. This is, generally they point to the ancient rishis with the path of knowledge, and they don't give much importance. That's considered the lowest. Then Dasya Bhava, and Sakhya Bhava, attitude of a friend. Then Vatsalya Bhava. How many do we have so far?
You got what's
That's 4? That's 4, then Madhura Bhava. Vatsalya Bhava, Mother Yashoda, toward the baby Gopal.
Thank you.
Now, each one is considered, the next one is higher than the lower one because it includes the lower one. This is the idea. So in the Madhura Bhava, sometimes the lover wants to serve the beloved. So we get the Dasya Bhava. Sometimes wants to nourish the way we would for a small child, so we get Vatsalya Bhava and all of that. So that's the rationale behind it.
So they have an order.
There's a hierarchy, yes.
So could you please tell the hierarchy?
Shanta Bhava,
comes first.
yeah, the Dasya Bhava, Sakhya Bhava, Vatsalya Bhava, and Madhur Bhava.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for a very wonderful talk. I was hoping you might say a little bit more about this problem, the ignorance, especially as it comes up for the non-dual position. 'Cause
Yes.
Of course, it makes no sense to say Brahman is ignorant.
Yes.
But on the other hand, if there's nothing other than Brahman, then we feel the ignorance. Where does the ignorance lie?
the real problem is to account for Maya from the cosmic point of view. This is the real problem. We can understand our own ignorance. I'll get to that after, the individual one. But how to explain how this perfect ultimate reality, Brahman, can come under the spell of some type of illusion, so that it not only projects the universe, but enters into it and forgets itself.
Yes.
So once it enters into it and forgets itself, then it's the individual ignorance of Vidya. That we can understand even from a psychological point of view, even from the point of view of child psychology. And I mentioned it a little bit, how in the beginning the child only sees what's external. It's only at a certain stage where the child has any conception of interior life. I'll tell an interesting story. We had a family friend who had a son who was handicapped. He had some mental handicap. And I had a niece who was then maybe 7, 8 years old, I don't know, something like that. So he was asking me why he behaved the way that he did. So I thought I'd give a very intelligent explanation. I said, sometimes we have some diseases that affect the body. He has something that affects his mind. So she looked at me and she said, "What is the mind?" Yeah. She had no conception of what it meant to have a mind. So by the time we reached the point where we've developed mentally or age-wise, however, that we understand that we have an interior life, we've already formed these very deep samskaras, impressions, with regard to identification with all external things. So that, I think, is much easier to understand how that takes place. So our problem is that now we're trying to undo all of this sense of identification that we had, and this is where this verse comes in. There are two ways of undoing it. One is to try to go back, remove everything, and the other is through this kind of affirmation and forming or superimposing another layer of truth on it. A little bit like if you want to remove paint from old paint from furniture, you can scrape it away, or you can add some paint thinner on top, or some paint remover, right? And then scrape it away and make it a little easier. So this individual ignorance comes from this false identification, which is a natural phenomenon. It affects everyone. Now, we may talk about some skaras are supposed to be these impressions that we're born with, and some people can easily get rid of, kind of shake off this maya, and some people it's very, very strong. And it depends on the nature of the mind. This is one of the contradictions that we have, or paradox, that if I'm separate from the mind, it shouldn't matter what the state of my mind is. But it's the mind is the instrument I'm using to understand that I'm separate from it. So our spiritual practice involves refining this mind, purifying the heart, refining the mind, getting subtler and subtler powers of discrimination and analysis and everything, so that we can realize that higher truth. The other thing that is very, very important, especially in the path of knowledge, is, this is called viveka, discrimination. The other is called vairagya, dispassion. That it's not simply the case that we have a misconception about our true nature. A lot of it is that we have tremendous attachment to the world, and attachment to our own personality and our ego and all of that. So it involves this subtle intellect. It also involves a great degree of detachment, dispassion, not caring too much for the external world, and being a little bit indrawn, and liking solitude and quiet, and liking to go deep within. By the way, that may be more important even. The distinction between this intellect and the heart is a very false distinction. They work closely together. One, purifying the heart means eliminating all of these lower tendencies and desires and everything. And unless we do that, the deeper understanding will just be on an intellectual level. It won't help too much. I mean, it has a role to play, of course. They can give us some conviction and everything, but we have to work on both sides. Did that help?
It does. Here's the difficulty that
Yeah.
remains.
Yeah.
In explaining the ignorance on the individual level is not being too hard to explain.
Right.
You're assuming the very plurality or dualism that the non-dual position denies. So
This is recognizing the fact of things as opposed to the truth of things, and this is what we're doing here. We're recognizing our ignorance, and at the same time recognizing the truth underlying it. That's why I say this verse, when it says cover everything with the Lord, it doesn't mean that we're adding something that's not there. So one of the problems with people who follow Advaita Vedanta is that they find there's nothing to do. They find that I'm already perfect, and if I say that I'm striving for perfection, then I'm falling into this trap of duality. It's a very poor understanding of things. We have to recognize our duality as something false, but utilize it. We have to utilize it. Who is it ultimately that wants to realize oneness? It's the person who's in a state of ignorance right now. So I'll give you the example of this two birds. This is an illustration from the Mundaka Upanishad that Swami Atmajnananda, he turns into a beautiful parable. And we'll get to this this afternoon, actually. Anyhow, that the lower bird sees the higher bird that's not doing anything and wants to realize that. So, or wants to attain union with it or have company of it, so it keeps hopping higher and higher until he realizes that it was that same bird the whole time. But if at the bottom he says, I am that bird, it won't necessarily do anything unless he can make the journey, which is no journey. I mean, it's a paradox. Most of spiritual life is a paradox. But we shouldn't think that utilizing a dualistic position in order to realize non-dualism is somehow contradictory. What I was saying, this idea, I am Brahman, this is dualistic. There's me and there's Brahman. The higher truth will be Brahman alone exists, not I am Brahman. That I has to disappear or be transformed. Yes?
You mentioned about the dispassion, and then comes this passionate pursuit of relating to God, all these powers that you explained.
Yes.
And it looks like the ultimate mother power will be the highest level of craving for union.
Mm.
And it's a very passionate process. But how can you, go about it in a dispassionate way?
We have two different areas here. This passion has to be towards these worldly things, and passion has to be for God. Now, when I talked about this hierarchy, this is just from a schematic point of view. From a practical point of view, whichever path one is suited to is the highest. Whichever relationship is the highest. We don't judge. If this Dasya Bhava is more appropriate for someone's personality, they automatically have this servant attitude, say Arjuna, something like that, then that's the one that's best for them. If the other is not a good fit, then it doesn't mean it's the best. It just from some very scholastic point of view, we can make this hierarchy. Sri Ramakrishna used to talk about two things, which were the critical things in spiritual life. One, he said, is ruchi bhed, that we all have a different taste. We like different things. Some things that appeal to us. And the other, he would say, is hajam shakti, that we all have a different power of digestion. And he would give the illustration that if there's a buffet, and we all see there are different things that we like, but some things we can't digest. They're not good for us. And he says that the Divine Mother cooks, he gives the example, he cooks fish. She'll bring home a big fish. She has the 5 different children. Each one has a different taste and a different power of digestion. Some have a weak stomach. She'll make this fish stew. Some like spicy fish, some like fried fish, whichever one the child likes and which one is the child can digest, both of them. So these are the things that are more important. But this is a very important point with regard to passion, that if we want to become dispassionate for the world, then we have to increase this passion for God. Yeah, we shouldn't think all passion is bad. We shouldn't think all desire is bad. Desire for God realization is necessary. We have to have that. So, yeah, this passion, this is that bakulata, is very important.
Any more questions?
Time. Any,
Yeah. Any more questions? No? Okay, we have.
I want to
Okay.
make a comment.
okay.
You know, this Maya Shakti is a Brahma Shakti.
Hmm.
It is the Shakti of the Brahman.
Hmm.
When Brahman with Maya Shakti, we call him Ishvara, created this world. Then the same Maya Shakti at the Jiva level is ignorance. That is the Maya Shakti actually at the Jiva level.
Yes, yes,
And everybody is born with ignorance
yes,
because everybody had that Maya Shakti.
yes.
Unless you penetrate the Maya Shakti,
Hmm.
there is no liberation for the
Yeah.
Jiva.
This is actually a very easy way of understanding. It also has philosophical problems with it. There's no perfect solution, but to simply replace Maya with Shakti, to replace this idea, not to think of that which is causing the one to become the many as some type of illusion, but as a power that belongs to Brahman. That means that Brahman is both Nirguna and Saguna. That Brahman is both beyond, and this is what I'm saying, it's the same dreamer and the sleeper. They're one and the same. The dreamer is endowed with this power to project the dream. The sleeper is just the sleeper, but they're not two separate people. And the person in the dream is not separate from the dreamer and the sleeper. It's only the same one. But we have to break that dream. That's the individual ignorance. The cosmic ignorance is what's causing the dream to take place. The individual ignorance is what is not allowing the actor in the dream to realize that he's one with the dream. So that one we call avidya, the other we call maya. But they're the same.